Hi, I'm Tim of 1916 Company here in Los Angeles at the legendary Larrabee Studios. Thanks to our friends at Wrensilva, whose custom hi-fi record consoles share our value for enduring craftsmanship and heirloom quality. Today, as part of our series One Watch, One Record, we explore the magic of horology and vinyl. And to kick off this series, I'm here with a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Manny Marroquin. 41-time Grammy nominations, 18 wins outright. He's up for 3 more this year. Manny, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
My pleasure, and I've got to say, all things considered, it's best to start at the beginning. So many watch collectors have early memories of their interest in watches, but I find music's more fundamental. Where does your earliest memory of music enter the timeline?
Oh, wow. So I was born in Guatemala. You know, these Latin countries have food and music. Not a lot of opportunity, but there's always food and music around. So from 6 to 9, from what I can remember, there was always live music around. So when we moved to the States, listen, single mom, we didn't live in the greatest neighborhoods. So that's where I really started to pick up music because it's either you hung out with all the bad kids, or you kind of got away from it, and music was sort of the escape. So I ended up going to this school called Hamilton Music Academy. It was its first year, and it was the best environment for a kid like myself, where all we did was music. That's all we did. So that was the beginning of my musical career. So I checked a box that said music productions. I didn't know anything about that. So there were only 5 kids in our class, and we would make beats and bass lines and chords, and every Friday the teacher would walk around with his headphones and be like, okay, cool, try this. I mean, it was the chillest, most amazing class. It was a 2-hour class. And then Friday we would play each other what we worked on. So I'll never forget when David Sears, my teacher, listens to the song that I just created and goes, hey, now you gotta mix it. I'm like, well, what do you mean? What is that? This is what my art, this is what the world hears. He's like, no, come here. And he brought me over to a little board, a Ramsa 32x8 with a reel-to-reel Tascam 8-track recorder. And he just sat there and explained the process of mixing. And from that moment, I was 15 years old. I was able to change emotion based on frequencies. And to me, that just changed my life. And to this day, that blows my mind that I can change not a chord, not a melody, but a frequency, and that will give you a different emotion. And that's what we do. That's what a mixer does.
Now, your earliest awareness of watches, most people who are into watches have the bug long before they can afford them, or even understand that watch collecting is a hobby. When did you first develop an interest in watches?
So when we moved to the States, my mom's best friend, Edie's, married a Italian-born, Argentine-raised, and migrated to LA. He became like my father figure. Every night at dinner, he would roll up his sleeves. First thing I remember seeing his watch, and it was like a shiny watch, and it wasn't anything fancy, but the way he carried himself, it's almost as this watch just gave him confidence, like the confidence he had, and probably had maybe nothing to do with that, but him rolling up the sleeves and talking about his day, talking about this wine and the food. It's the first person that I met that was passionate about something, right? And of course, as a young engineer, you're broke, you can't afford any good watches, but I always would buy these watches that made me feel good, I would buy them for $200-300 and it just made me feel good, and I remember always saying, whenever I make a little bit of money, I'm gonna buy my first watch, and I'm gonna leave it to my kids and all the legacy.
Well,
and all
did
that.
You?
Yeah, I bought my first watch, man. It was, it's funny, it was a tag, and gosh, I lost it, or someone still, I don't remember where it is, but I remember when I bought it, it gave me that same feeling of just achievement. And I can relate to maybe, I do a lot of hip hop, and I talk about chains. It's like, man, why are you wearing that big chain? What, and then when someone explains to you what that chain represents, then you're like, oh, well, yeah, that makes total sense. To you is a chain, to that person is a Lamborghini, to that person is a watch, and that person is a DRC from Burgundy, or, So that was just I think it's a symbol of sophistication, right? And anything that I mentioned, whether it was a car, a wine, a watch, one thing that they all have in common is they pay attention to every detail, and it's the highest craftsmanship of anything, right?
Where did the collection go from that original tag? As you discovered more about watches, did you get deeper into it? Are there some watches in your collection right now that you consider standouts, pieces that are really special to you?
I mean, look, the watch I'm wearing now, to me, is probably the most special one, just because it represents where I got it, how I got it, and all of that.
Well, so let's talk about that. Let's unpack the Rolex Cellini. Start from the beginning here.
All my friends have Rolexes, and that to me, again, going back to the rapper with a chain, all these new A&Rs, the first thing they do is go buy a Rolex, right? And that's not something that I wanted to do because everybody was doing it. I kind of wanted to go against it, but I love the look of a beautiful Rolex, right? So I was like, well, I started researching on what what I would consider the classiest, most underrated Rolex would be, and I started reading about the Cellini. And then funny enough, John Mayer really got me in. Like, we would talk about watches for hours. And this guy talk about somebody you need to really sit down with. He knows everything about every watch, and he's got a great collection. But the Cellini, we go to Italy, and I always wanted to go to that Rolex store because it's right in front of the Cellini statue. On the
Benvenuto Cellini himself.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I did. I said, if I'm gonna go buy a piece, I'm gonna go to that store, I'm gonna get the Rolex Cellini. So from that point on, it was like, well, this is something that I will, became obsessed with Cellini. So I've got a few of them, different years, different make, different styles and stuff. But they all, to me, that's the only Rolex that, to me, I can just wear at a nice dinner and no one's gonna be saying, oh, that's a Rolex.
It feels like the vintage pieces you admired. It feels more like a vintage watch than a modern watch.
Yeah, it doesn't attract the attention that, say, a lot of watches do. And for me, look, I'm very understated. I don't wanna attract any attention for any reason. I don't wear jewelry, and anything I have on me represents something, right? And that to me was, that's why when let's do this watch/music, to me is like, oh, that's like perfect,
So you have an album that's important to you and you've tied it to the watch. Tell me about the album and then we'll get into the watch tie-in.
Yeah. So one of the main reasons why I started playing drums is I heard Black Dog, Led Zeppelin.
John Bonham letting it rip.
I mean, it was one of the biggest. I didn't know that was even possible to have a sound like that. Gosh, I must have been 11, 12 when I first heard it on the vinyl, when my neighbor played it. And I immediately was obsessed with that sound. And I think I was kind of playing drums, but really okay, now I'm really playing. Being some of the best musicians, I mean, again, the craft is so high, and at the time with Jimmy Page being a studio musician, what he brought to that, and John being the crazy dude that he was, it just made it for an amazing combination of sounds that were, they were just blues, just with some little bit of grunge and attitude, but musicianship is as good as any musician ever. And at the time there was prog rock and all that, but to me, I don't know, he just spoke to me, like the way he played, the way he phrased, the way he would hit the hi-hat, the way he would do his solos, and I mean all those little subtle movements and the way you hit a drum It's just perfection. That's why it's still one of my favorite records of all time. Back then, it was just this kid that heard freaking something bigger than God, playing. But something about the combination of these musicians on this album happens to be the soundtrack of my life. It represents so much of the time in their careers, but me listening to it at that moment was that kid trying to find himself, right? Now, that album was recorded, the drums at the bottom of a staircase in some freaking castle in England, right? And that's one of the earlier home studios.
The space gives it the sound.
Exactly. It's larger than life. Now, is it the sound? Is it this freaking castle that's been there for 1,500 years? Whatever it is, a lot of it is just unexplainable, and and that's the beauty of it, right?
Pulling yourself away from work, because I understand it can be difficult to break personal and professional lives apart. But when you listen to music just for the pleasure of hearing it, of discovery, or to find peace, what do you listen to? How do you listen? What does it mean to you?
So I listen to music in two separate ways. One is in my analytical way, where I'm analyzing everything about the record. And I chose the studio. So the only way I break down a song, a record, is by listening to it in the studio. Everything else outside of the studio, as I listen to it as a fan. And what I do when I listen is how I always check my emotion. I always check my body. I listen to my body first. And is it making me tap my right foot, left, front, back? Do I get tense? Do I get relaxed? Do I get sad, lonely, happy? I do an immediate check on the emotion. And that I could be listening to a record in the car, at home, it doesn't matter. But the first thing I do is I check what physically is doing to me. And then it lasts a second. And then at that point, I really try to enjoy why that emotion is making me feel something. Because at the end of the day, we listen to music because we want to feel something, right? And it's incredible that out of two speakers, you can feel something, right? And that's why music is so powerful. And it's the best medicine, is the cure of all. I have playlists that if I'm depressed, boom, I put get my coffee boost. This is my freaking espresso. If I'm too high, then I listen to some mellow. If I want to relax, I got different playlists for different emotional.
It's like the tone control for your life.
Yeah. It's like a bunch of little, you need a little more bass or more excitement in your life. But that's how I listen, and I try to be very mindful of the emotion, though, first of all.
I have another question. You had input with the Wrensilva folks into the creation of the new console systems. Could you just tell me real quick, what goes into creating a system for listening to music as opposed to engineering it firsthand?
Look, ultimately, this is it. This is the final, whatever we do in the studio, this is where it all ends. So we want to make sure that whatever the final product is being represented the best possible way, right? That's what Jimmy Iovine would always say. Hey man, make it the best you can make it in your room, and then let the chips fall where they fall. And hopefully it ends up in a way that was representative of what you ended up doing in the studio. So when you get to listen to a record in a way that represents sort of an extension of a studio, when I first heard the Wrensilva, that's what it did to me. I'm like, oh, snap, this is actually exactly how I heard it in the studio. And the sound, when we were working on EQing the sound and making sure that it sounded like the studio. Vinyl is such a dynamic format that it just makes you feel something. So with, giving my 2 cents on the sound for what that's worth, I felt the energy as I felt it when it was being created. Now, that doesn't happen often. I don't remember the last time that happened. I've never put something on and thought, besides being in the studio, this is what it represents. So this is like taking the studio into your home in a way. And it sounds great, and it makes me feel good every time I play a record. And there's a reason why vinyl sales are still strong. There's something tangible. There's nothing, there's too much music now and DSPs, and there's nothing tangible anymore. But we need that.
So to put a bow tie on all this, and this has been fantastic. We connected the Cellini to what it means in the scope of your career and your life. Is there any link between the Cellini and Led Zeppelin, or Led Zeppelin and Italy? Anything that we can use to put a bow tie on this?
Yeah, to me, it's all connected. It's a point in my life that I was trying to find myself. I grew up without my dad, so this is the first father figure that and his confidence by. Not his shoes, not his jeans, his shirt, by a watch, I could feel his confidence. And at the same time, I discovered and at the same time, I was trying to find myself. If I go this direction, oh man, I'm gonna have some neck tattoos and probably be in prison or 6 feet under. Or if I go this direction, shit, I may actually be playing drums like maybe Bonham someday. So it was a very interesting time in my life, and that to me is the connection. Besides the craftsmanship of just perfection, everyone in the studio wanting to be perfect, every piece has to be perfect, right? That to me goes without saying, but it's just like the soundtrack to my life of what it made me and how it shaped my personality and my choice making today.
Manny, thank you so much.
Yeah, man, thank you. This is great.